big welcome to Dr. Joel Perez. Welcome to the show, to the Empathy Edge. I am delighted to talk to you today about cultural humility, operational excellence through cultural humility, and for you to share your insights with us about all the things we think about inclusion and maybe where we're missing opportunities to embrace cultural humility
Mhm.
in order to achieve results in our organizations. So, welcome to the show.
Oh, it's good to be here. Thank you, Maria, for having me, and really looking forward to this conversation.
I am too. And so, before we get going, as we always do, share a little of your story with us. How did you even get into this work? Why are you so passionate about it? All the
Mhm.
things.
Yeah, so thank you for the question. So, as you see an accent on my last name, Joel Pérez, born in Los Angeles, son of immigrants, grew up in a predominantly initially fairly white neighborhood that changed over time. So, lived white flight growing up, and then went off to college where I was not part of the majority culture. And that shaped my worldview, particularly around diversity, equity, and inclusion. Identify as a man of color, Chicano, Latino. Spanish was my first language. And I really believed higher education was going to be my vocation. And started that track, master's, PhD, working in higher education. And then as things happen, you get a new senior leader and things change. And I ended up having to pivot. And the one thing that really pulled me in was coaching. I always thought I wanted to be an executive coach, but was going to do it in retirement. And things got sped up mainly because we were living in a really good community. Our kids didn't want to leave their schools. We didn't want to move. And so we stayed, and in that process, leaned into getting certified as a coach and then started coaching. And in that coaching process, one of the things I started doing was helping white leaders who wanted to get better at leading diverse teams, but didn't know where to start or were feeling stuck. And
Hmm.
I had been introduced to the concept of cultural humility in the mid 2000s,
Hmm.
and it had stuck with me mainly because was very familiar with cultural competency, but I always felt like at the end of the cultural competency conversation that there should be more, because competency for me felt like a box to check, an I to dot, a T to cross, something to be achieved. Whereas cultural humility was really drawing to me because, like, oh, it's about developing the ability to lead well within the complexity that comes with leading, creating an inclusive organization. So, in the work that I was doing, particularly with white leaders who wanted to get better, I was doing what I would call, and I still call cultural humility coaching. And I recognized that there was a story to share.
Hmm.
And that led me to writing the book, Dear White Leader: How to Achieve Organizational Excellence Through Cultural Humility. Now, Maria, you've written books, and you know if you don't have a target audience, you don't have an audience.
Exactly.
And so my target audience is white leaders who want to get better. Now, every concept of the book is applicable to any leader, regardless of your cultural background, your identity, your salient identity.
Right.
So I do workshops and trainings around how do you develop or move towards a posture of cultural humility, no matter what your cultural background is
Hmm.
or whatever your salient identities is. But to answer your question, what compelled me was working with the leaders I was working with and wanting to change the way we approach this work with this posture, because identities will continue to change, culture will continue to morph. And in that process, I realized that this posture helps you engage in difficult dialogue with a deep sense of curiosity, where you're seeking to understand versus seeking to convince.
Love it. I love it. I talk about empathy being a
Yes.
method of connection, not
Mhm.
coercion.
Mhm. Oh, mhm.
And so I everything you're saying is resonating for me. I'd love a breakdown though of what is the difference between cultural humility and cultural competence. So when you talk about cultural competence being a checkbox, is it more like I know about other cultures and I recognize them? And then where does cultural humility take that? So if you
Yeah,
can do some definitions for us.
no, I appreciate that. So I was just with actually doing a webinar before jumping on here. talking about that cultural competency is important. It is the foundation. Terry Cross and his associates back in the late 80s did a lot of work about around cultural competency. But like you said, it was about understanding a culture and then applying the skills you learn so that you can better lead or your organization to do better work. The challenge, Maria, is that because things continue to change, what may have worked 10 years ago doesn't work anymore. The example I'll give you is that I have a 17-year-old who came out to us when they were in middle school, and I was certain I was going to raise four heterosexual children, and that was not the case anymore.
Right.
I had to do a lot of work myself in the sense of how do I create this posture of cultural humility in my fatherhood where I'm seeking to understand, creating space to explore. It's not about checking boxes and like, okay,
Hmm.
I did this, I did that, I did this, which I'm not saying cultural competency that is necessarily that
Right.
specifically, but that's how it feels. Whereas cultural humility is about a sense of openness,
Right.
understanding, engaging in dialogue. You may not agree with the person at the end of the day,
Right.
but you're walking away with a better understanding. Whereas I believe competency just feels a little bit more like an academic
Yeah.
endeavor, where culture humility, because humility is something a lot of leaders aspire to have,
Hmm.
but it's hard to obtain. And I would say because it's a process, it's a lifelong journey, and
Right.
recognizing that you're going to make mistakes, it's what you do with those mistakes that help you get better in leading across difference.
Well, and I feel like so much of this is really about empathy because I talk about empathy being the ability to put your ego aside and understand that there's another point of view and be open to it.
Yeah.
But also this sense of curiosity. Curiosity is the number one trait of empathic people.
Yes.
And it's because they don't think they have all the answers. They're going to ask you what your point of view is.
Yeah.
So I guess in my mind, and maybe for some of my listeners, is this more about cultural competency is knowing that the group is there, knowing what some of those groups' norms are, and creating that checkbox for yourself, right? Like
Hmm.
we often do this with other cultures where we say, "Oh, that's a very hierarchical culture," or
Right.
"That's a culture where you need to get to know people personally first before
Hmm.
you engage in business." Like
Hmm.
there's these rules that go along
Yes.
with the culture.
Mhm.
Are you saying that cultural humility is more about the curiosity to always be attuned to where those cultures could be evolving? And also the difference is that it's not everybody in that culture that acts in that particular way or subscribes to those quote unquote norms.
Yes, that's the short answer. And
Okay.
the academic definition was coined or developed by two researchers, Trevelyan and Garcia, who were working with looking at doctors, physicians, and frustrated with them because they were applying what they thought worked with one culture
To
to the
another.
other culture. And
Yeah.
that clearly was not working. And they really wanted to, them to improve that patient physician dynamic because
Mm-hmm.
they knew they needed to serve their clients better within the particular demographic group they were working with. And you can't just, it's not a cookie cutter, right? You can't
Right.
just take one approach and apply it to all, even though at times we really want that for
Yeah.
ourselves.
Yeah.
But the reality is that it doesn't work that way. And
Right.
the way I talk about it is cultural humility allows you to navigate the complexity that comes with developing organizations with a strong sense of belonging and psychological safety that you are aspiring it to have.
Right. So why do leaders need this? What
Mm.
does it do for their organization and for their team performance?
Yeah. So the way I respond to that, because I get that question
Yeah.
when I do workshops, and in the book, I talk about it as well, is that leaders need to develop this posture if they're going to lead exceptionally. I believe cultural humility is a trait of exceptional leadership. The story I share is when I was talking with a coaching colleague of mine. I was like, "Hey, Brian, I'm writing this book and I'm really excited about helping leaders be effective." And he stopped me. He said, "Joel, if the bar is effective, the bar is too low. we need exceptional leaders because if you want to engage your talent and retain your talent, you're going to need to navigate that complexity because they're bringing their identities into the workplace, into your teams. So you need to be able to navigate and lead people across difference.
Right.
And what you think works at, like I said, going back to what worked 10 years ago, probably won't work now. And
Right.
it's getting clear about you. So self-awareness is really a key aspect of developing a posture of cultural humility, which has three characteristics: getting clear on your biases,
Hmm.
cultural self-awareness,
Hmm.
and other awareness. And
Right.
the other awareness is key. So what are you doing to create a space for your team members to share more about who they are and their identities and create that space in a way that's going to be helpful in creating that sense of belonging. And that's going to lead, the business case is it's going to lead to retaining your talent because they feel like they belong, right?
Right.
And
Right.
there's that Harvard Business Review study done in 2019 that belonging, developing a sense of belonging in your organizations increases the retention rate of your team members, right?
100%.
So there's the ROI,
Hmm.
but also I believe as people, there is a call for us to be able to bridge across differences if we're truly going to be able to lead exceptionally.
Yeah. I mean, and the fact of the matter is we have difference inherent in every team. And, to your point, there's there's all these other quote unquote cultures out there that are really just different groups, different subcultural groups that we might not understand, that we might not be able to relate to. But when you have a team, you're bringing all these different personalities together. And there's
Yes.
statistics. I was actually trying to find it while we were talking. There's a startling statistic around how many Gen Zers
Mm.
identify as neurodivergent, which
Yes.
is another type of culture,
Oh,
right?
hmm.
And that number's going up, and not necessarily because there's more. It's just people are removing the stigma from being able to
Yes.
admit that they are neurodiverse. And with that comes tremendous opportunity to harness that for your team
Hmm.
and boost innovation and boost productivity. But it also creates things that are rife for conflict if you don't
Yes.
have that open mind, if you have a very like, we need to do it this way because this is the way we've always done it, or this is the only way I know how.
Hmm.
And so we're beholden to the fact that if we want to harness all the intellectual and innovative power of these teams of diverse human beings,
Hmm.
we as the leader need to be able to be open to their different perspectives and life experiences. And to your point again, it doesn't mean you have to quote unquote agree. It doesn't mean that you have to cave into unreasonable demands. I talk about this in
Yes.
terms of the myths of empathy.
Right.
But empathy requires us to sort of shut our ego down and open our eyes and our
Hmm.
ears and be able to
Right.
listen. And I notice for people that can't see you, you're wearing a t-shirt that says be curious, not judgmental.
Yes.
And that's really the key to empathy as well.
Hmm.
But it's so important for us to understand the ROI that this has on our organization
Hmm.
and how if we ignore it, we're going to fall behind. Things
Right.
are changing too fast.
Hmm.
The workforce is much more diverse, much more willing to admit that they're diverse
Hmm.
than ever before.
Yes.
And we've got to be able to capture those various points of view so that we make smarter business decisions.
Yeah, that's it.
So
Hmm.
go ahead.
No, I was going to say thank you for naming that because I think it's important that you name that yes, nimble, neurodiverse is really important. I have two kids. One has ADHD, one has dysgraphia. We talk about difference and how it shows up in the classroom, right? And then how they engage in the world. I also work with seasoned professionals, aka old people, who are like, Joel, help me understand the new worker, right? I don't get
Right.
it. Like, why do they need this? Why do they need that?
Right.
Well, what if you approach that with curiosity, where you're seeking to understand? Because you're going to have to help them be successful in your organization if you're going to create some kind of succession plan and for your organization to thrive. And that means learning about them and you not telling them it has to be this way because it was that way for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. And at the end of the day, if you want your goals met, and your KPIs achieved.
Yes.
You've got to bring people along
Mhm.
to do
Mhm.
that. And so
Yeah.
you can shame and blame and disagree all you want, but that's not actually going to help you with your goals
Yes.
either,
Correct.
right?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
it's about managing to the person in front of you. And yes, it takes a little bit more time.
Mhm.
And yes, it takes a little bit more caring. And
Yes.
that's the job. I
Yes.
always, I'm kind of tired of pussyfooting around that, tiptoeing around
Mhm.
that for
Mhm.
people. But it's really about understanding that that's your role now. You are
Yes.
not a doer, you are a leader now.
Yes.
And that
That's right.
means harnessing the value of everyone on your team.
Yeah.
So, how do we begin to develop a posture of cultural humility? Because there are the people who are like, yes, I know I have a gap and I want to learn.
Mhm.
Then there's other people who don't think they need it. So, who do you
Right.
talk to?
Well, I focus on if you're looking at change principles, right? In
Yeah.
the sense of, you have the early adopters and the laggards. Uh, I try to live in the middle with the folks that are truly curious, not quite sure. I think as leaders, we've done a disservice to the people in the middle because we will flock to the extremes, which then
Hmm.
crowds the middle out where they don't feel like they can ask questions
Yes.
because they have a fear of, if you want to use a term, canceled
Yep.
or
Or
um,
saying the wrong thing,
right. And
right?
so I talk about as leaders, we need to create space for mistakes to be okay with that. When I, to answer your question, I believe so. It starts with self-awareness and self-critique, which is the key to anything I believe in leadership, right? We have to be clear about who we are
Yeah.
in order to know how we need to improve and get better so we can lead exceptionally,
Hmm.
right? So that requires three things: getting clear on our biases, cultural self-awareness, and other awareness. So that's part of that self-awareness piece that I talk about. From moving from cultural competency to cultural humility, I talk about three things that are necessary. One is having a growth mindset. So looking at Carol Dweck's work, because you're going to make mistakes, right? It's what you do with those mistakes.
Right.
The second is developing deep curiosity, being able to learn how to be deeply curious. And the third, which sounds simple enough, is deep listening.
Hmm.
Right. Now, we always say we're good listeners, and the reality is we still have a lot of work to do with listening.
Yeah.
Right. And so, working with executive and leaders on how to develop those three things is really key to start that process and to recognize, and this is where leaders get frustrated. There's not an endpoint per se because it is a process. So, it always goes back to self-awareness.
Uh-huh.
The second piece is redressing the power imbalances. So as you begin to learn about yourself and others that you lead, you're going to recognize, if you want to use equity, that's what you're going to recognize, that there's some inequity that needs to change, right? Whether it's pay or just the way things are structured. Um, so you're going to want to redress those power imbalances that ultimately is going to lead to systemic change.
Hmm.
But it always starts with you, the leader, but it doesn't end with you.
So I have a question for you, and this is something that comes up for me personally sometimes, but also I know when I talk to a lot of people about this, is that there are some groups when you try to enter and you try to get curious and ask the questions,
Mhm.
they can sometimes, and not all groups, there's no like one group, I'm just saying
Nope.
different people
Mhm.
who say that's your job to figure it out. I'm not here
Mm.
to educate you. What are leaders who are trying to get curious and actively listening supposed to do with that?
Well, this is where a little bit of humble pie is necessary in that. When people come to me because of my ethnicity and my faith, and they say, I really want to know. For me to have permission to say, Maria, thank you for the question, but I'm really tired right now. And yes, I understand you want to know, but I'm not there. I can't have this conversation. And for you, Maria, to say, thank you. Just know that if you're ever able to have that conversation, I really would like to engage in the conversation and walk away. The danger, not danger, the problem is that we have is we want to press, right? Help me, help me, help me, help me. And it's, yes, you need to get better, but for some people, sometimes I'm included, I don't want to have to always educate.
Right.
So you, Maria, or ex-leader need to think about, okay, Joel doesn't really want to share. What do I need to change in my own life in order so for me to gain awareness? Part of
Right.
that could be talking with Joel, or part of that could be listening to podcasts or putting myself in different types of communities, reading, joining a Facebook group. So I'm able to learn more about another culture.
Right.
But for us to say it's okay that Joel doesn't want to share. Now, I may change my mind in 6 months.
Yeah.
So you could come back to him and say, hey, Joel, remember that conversation we had? And I know you weren't ready for it. Are you able to now
Yeah.
have that conversation? And I'll say, well, first, thank you for recognizing and appreciating what I said to you. And yes, I'm ready to have that conversation now.
Right.
Or I know someone who does this work
Yeah.
who may be able to help you where I'm not able to
Right.
help you. Mhm,
I think that that's the frustration for leaders who want to get curious is
mhm,
that sometimes feel rebuffed
mhm.
by being curious.
Yeah.
They're attacked for making assumptions, they're attacked for
Mhm,
asking the questions, and that's the fine line there of like they've got to get the information from somewhere if they're open to listening.
mhm.
So are you basically saying keep trying? Not with the same person, but I'm saying
Yeah.
like just because you get rebuffed once.
Yeah. So that's where it's important for you to recognize that I may be rebuffed once. It doesn't mean there aren't others who are going to be willing to partner with me.
Right.
Right. So I'm going to keep looking. The
Right.
other thing I would say, Maria, when you approach someone is say, hey, this is coming from a place of curiosity. I truly want to know. It's not coming from a place of judgment. And
Right.
it's okay for you to say no.
Yeah.
That's different than you saying, hey, I have some
Tell me
questions
all
for you.
about it. Yeah.
Tell me all about your Mexican heritage and why you eat certain foods. Right. Um,
Represent your entire community for me right
exactly.
now.
And
Yeah.
and I think recognizing that and
Yeah.
it's the way you ask. It's like well, you talk about empathy, right? It's being an empath and being empathetic and putting yourself in that other person's shoes.
Yeah.
And now for me, I make myself available for conversations. That's that I don't
Right.
mind being in that lane, but I have
Right.
colleagues who don't like being in that lane.
Right.
And they say to me, hey, Joel, it's so good you're in that lane. I have no desire. And I say, okay, thank you. Send them my way. Happy to have a conversation.
Exactly.
And that's the approach to take or start
Yeah.
taking. And I would bet that opportunities would arise for you to have conversations so you can ask questions. If you start off the conversation with coming from a place of curiosity, it's okay for you to say no if you don't
Yeah.
want to have the conversation. But here's what I'm wondering.
Yeah. I love that. I love that you're kind of giving us some words to
Mhm,
say when
mhm.
that can be uncomfortable
Right.
sometimes
Yeah.
to reach out and ask. And I know this from being a woman
Mm.
and having, you know, men try
Mhm,
to get me to speak for my entire gender,
mhm,
right? And I also know I've been part of groups of women that claim that men need to be more curious about what women are going through, and then they get very vicious to any men who enter the conversation. And I'm
mhm,
like, no, they actually, that's good. We need them
mhm.
to be part of the conversation.
Yeah.
So I know there's a lot of hurt, there's a lot
Mm.
of frustration and resentment that builds up.
Mhm,
And so
mhm,
I get where some of those people are coming from, but I
mhm.
love your idea of, but there's other people. So
Yeah.
don't give up.
Yeah.
Don't assume all women don't want to include men in the
Right.
conversation, right? As
Right.
an
That's right.
example,
Yes.
because I've seen that and I'm like, that doesn't help any of us for us to not have men as part of the conversation when from a male female dynamic
Hmm.
when we that's the gender we need to have allyship with.
Hmm.
That's
Hmm.
they're the ones in power in many
Yeah.
cases.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so if we've got open-minded and curious enough people in that group, we should be helping them. We should be working with them, and we should not make them feel blamed and shamed for their ignorance or
Right.
their,
Mhm.
but to your point, having that element of humility is so
Yes.
important, right?
Right. Hmm.
There's a great book, and I'll put a link in the show notes to someone that I interviewed on the podcast a few years ago, Amir Kaisi, who
Mm.
wrote a book called Humbitious, which is about the marriage of humility and ambitious in being a great leader.
Wow.
And so much of this is about that. And I'm constantly talking about this too. It's a growth mindset.
Hmm.
Because what I often say is show me a leader who thinks they know everything and don't need to learn anymore or
Hmm.
improve
Hmm.
themselves anymore, and I will show you a leader who's irrelevant
Yeah.
because you can't adapt, you can't be resilient, you can't change with the times, so to speak.
Hmm.
So this is great. This is great advice. Why did you write Dear White Leader, and what do you hope readers get out of it?
I wrote Dear White Leader because I wanted to write when I felt like others should hear about cultural humility.
Right.
It was a
You were
message
creating
for,
that resource for them when nobody
right.
else wants to talk to
Exactly. That's it.
them.
And the way the book is described by my readers, so if you go to Amazon, you'll see over
Hmm.
50 reviews. And generally the way people talk about my book from all cultures is that Joel is walking with us and not talking to us.
Yes.
So in the book is a lot of my own journey that I still make mistakes and some of the clients I work with. I talk about how I was enlightened about certain things that I thought I always knew, even growing up as a son of immigrants. Spanish was my first language, doing diversity work in my undergrad, that I still have things to learn,
Yeah.
right? And so that's where people say you're talking, Joel is walking with us and not
Right.
talking to us. So I wanted to write something to help leaders lead exceptionally so that they can be the best that they can be because I want our world to look different and feel different. I want our organizations to look and feel different. I want our faith communities to look and feel different. So the way I talk about it is it doesn't start or end with you. It moves into your organization,
Yeah.
whatever that organization is, and
Hmm.
then your community. And by community, I'm talking about your family, your faith community, your volunteer organization, your
Hmm.
neighborhood. So it's not just about holding it in for yourself. My
Right.
hope is as you develop this posture, it's going to bleed into every aspect of your life.
Yeah. I mean, that's exactly why I do the work around empathy is because we can use work as a sandbox to
Hmm.
practice
Hmm.
it and see ROI from it if we
Yeah.
choose to, but that also impacts us in our personal lives as well
Yeah. Hmm.
and helps us with our relationships and our community and our family.
Hmm.
We bring that back, and that's how we exponentially change.
Yeah. That's right.
So,
Hmm.
um, I'm also I would also love for you to speak to this idea that because we're asking, you're specifically not targeting, speaking to white leaders. Um, Help us understand that it doesn't mean they need to lose their cultural identity
No.
as well. Because I get that fear a lot. And
Yeah.
it's like, no, we're just trying to create a bigger pie.
Yeah.
We're not trying to make silence you.
Hmm.
So how do you address that when you're dealing with leaders who are a little resistant to what you're
Yeah.
talking about?
Well, one is I make the case, right? So whether it's the ROI or this idea of being moving from effective to exceptional, I also talk about it is I want leaders to understand they need to develop their they need to get a better sense of their own identities, right? Whether that's their ethnicity, gender, socioeconomic status, whatever they may be, that we have to get clear on our salient identities. And that may mean getting really clear about what it is to be white in this world. So I have an executive that I'm working with right now who is a leader in a nonprofit, a fairly
Hmm.
mid-sized nonprofit. And everyone he leads is either he identifies white male.
Uh-huh.
Everyone that he leads is either a person of color and or female or identifies as a female.
Hmm.
And so we were doing this work around identity. And so I gave him some resources, right? Janet Helms does a lot of work around white identity. And he engaged in that work. And he was like, wow, like, yeah, I got stuff to do. Like, so then we coached around that. Okay, if you recognize where you're at along her model and you want to move along the model, what are some things that you can do to get clear about who you are and the role it plays of how you show up in your leadership? And what I tell white leaders, particularly those that want to just keep apologizing for being white, is that I said, stop it. You only need to apologize once if you feel like you should apologize. It doesn't mean that every time you show up in a meeting, you have to apologize. Everyone gets it, right? They know you've already done it. You got to get comfortable in your own skin and show up to lead authentically. And part of that is recognizing who you are. It's your superpower. So this next book I'm working on is developing these traits that help you become an exceptional leader. One of them is leaning into your identity and seeing it as your superpower and not something to hide.
Yeah.
And that's really important work.
I love that. I love that call to just have empathy for yourself as well. And, give yourself some credit that you're trying to learn, you're trying to be curious, you're trying to be open when unfortunately there's so many people who aren't. right?
Right.
Um, so as we kind of wrap up, we've done a lot of episodes on this show around diversity, equity, and
Hmm.
inclusion
Hmm.
and the data and creating that environment. But maybe what are some ways or entry points if you are a leader, maybe in your organization, either DEI is being stifled right
Hmm.
now,
Hmm.
or it's just not made as important of a priority, or you're unlearning some things as a leader as you go along. How do they start developing like a day one, developing or week one or a month one, developing a deep sense of belonging with their team? Where are some places they can start if they listen to this podcast, read your book, and they're like, yeah, I mean, what's the right approach and what might
Hmm.
be not as effective of an approach? Can you give us both examples to
Sure.
start the conversation with your team?
Yeah. Well, I was working with an executive at an organization, and they identify as a white woman. And she said, Joe, I really want to get to know about the people I lead and their identities, but I just can't go around asking Maria, what's your identity? What's your
Yeah.
ethnic identity? I
Today
said,
we're going to
yeah,
talk about
yeah,
identities. Yeah.
let's don't do that. The key thing to start is modeling it for your team, sharing more about yourself that you feel comfortable sharing
Hmm.
so that they can see it in action, right? And then that maybe lead them to share more about themselves, right? That's an important first step. But first, asking yourself, is this something that I want to move towards? My hope is that it's yes, right? And then it's about gaining more self-awareness, particularly around this and what it means to one, acknowledge that I have biases. There has to be purpose behind your vulnerability, right?
Right.
And I think that could be a way. Or, hey, let's talk about what we did on the weekend and what did you find most enjoyable about what you did this weekend?
Right.
It could be I was with my family and we had a good time, or we attended this concert. Oh, say more about the concert you attended, right?
Yeah.
And that's going to begin, I believe, to develop this ability for people to share. Okay, Joel values who we are. One
Yeah.
of the things that Scott Shigioka talks about in his book Seek is recognizing that people are more than their jobs. If
Right.
you're going to create a culture of curiosity in your organization, is one of the steps is
Yeah.
understanding that people are more than their jobs, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's going to begin to model for people that they can share. I mean, you got to create, I mean, I do think it's important for there to be boundaries. I'm not saying
Of course.
you
Yeah.
open up your whole life to everyone,
Right.
but little things like that, where
Uh-huh.
you're leaning into sharing your own values, particularly around culture,
Uh-huh.
is going to help people connect with you and say, okay, I can share a little bit more about myself if I want
Yeah.
to. Not that I have to, but if I want
Right.
to.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
talk a lot about that in terms of empathetic leadership.
Hmm.
So coming in, getting to know people as people, building that trust, building that camaraderie and comfort level,
Hmm.
so
Hmm.
that when things get tough, people know
Yeah.
they can trust you. They can have each other's backs
Hmm.
as well. And so leaving that time in
Yep.
meetings to let people talk about what's going on for them or how their weekend went or
Hmm.
what they're frustrated about right now,
Yeah.
and giving each other the context so that I'm not assuming all these things about your reactions to
Right.
my ideas or my proposals or my behavior in a meeting. Like
Hmm.
if we
Hmm.
all know, hey, Joel had a tough weekend, if you are a little short with us in a meeting, we'll know why,
Yeah.
right? We
Yeah.
can assume positive intent.
Yeah.
And we can also decide if we want to table the conversation.
Right.
We can
Right.
decide if now's not the best time. So
Yeah. Hmm.
that's so much of this is intertwined with empathy, but just
Hmm.
looking at it through a cultural lens, which
Yes,
I
that's
find
right.
really, really interesting.
Yeah. The one thing leaders shouldn't do is this is where the performative piece gets in, right?
Yeah.
Like I have a diverse workforce and we're doing great stuff, right? Or we're going to make it a priority and just saying it, but then there's no action behind it,
Right.
right? And that's what a lot of companies did right after the murder of George Floyd is they put out a lot of statements.
Yeah.
Some took steps and actually put plans in place and were started executing them, but others were like, we're just going to make a statement.
Right.
We know it's going to go away, right? And so that's what you should not do as an organization, right?
Right.
And why? Because I believe organizations serve a greater good,
Hmm.
right? And it's important if you're going to put a statement out there that statements are important. So I'm not saying don't like if
Right. But back it up with action.
you got to back it up with action
Yeah.
and show that you're making progress towards whatever the goal is that you've set out to accomplish.
Right. How do you feel about the backlash to DEI right now?
Well, here I'm going to say
I'm sure you
something
feel
that,
a lot of things, but yeah.
yeah, I'm going to say something that's a little, could be a little controversial, and so I will, but I'll put it out
Yep.
there, is that I was really moved by something someone said in that we do change people, not two people, right? In other words, we should, when it comes to change, we should be partnering with people, not just do it to people, right?
Oh, we change with, not
We're not,
change
thank you.
to. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
And that got me thinking, particularly a lot of, and I put myself in this category early on when I was doing DEI work. I was telling people, you have to change. Like, you just have to do this. Demographics have changed. You just got to suck it up and get it done, right? It's the reality. Not once did I think about, hey, Maria, let's have a conversation about why this is important, right? And I want to set up time for you to ask me questions,
Yeah.
right? Because I want for you to hear it from me why this is important. And I think those of us who were doing a lot of DEI work early on, we were ramrodding people and not creating space for conversation.
Yeah.
And that's what's done a disservice. And I think has created the pendulum to swing the other way. Now,
Yeah.
I do believe the pendulum will start swinging back because
Yes.
organizations and leaders will recognize, look around the room and go, oh my gosh, there's a lot of different people here. And
Yeah.
whether it's generationally, gender, sexual identity, I got to get better at this stuff.
Yeah.
And if I want to lead this organization well,
Right.
because this is who comprises the organization.
Yeah. I love that. I think that's actually very profound
Mm.
of this idea of understanding where forced change, again, my change management background,
Mhm.
forced change never works.
Right.
It's about getting buy-in and
Yep.
it's about listening and it's
Yep.
about letting people feel what they feel
Mhm.
and going through it and not, shaming them for that,
Right.
but trying to bring them along.
Yep.
It's much more effective in the long run,
Yes. That's
right?
right. Hmm.
So I love it. This has been such goodness that you've shared with us today.
Hmm.
I just want to let everyone know again the name of the book is Dear White Leader: How to Achieve Organizational Excellence Through Cultural Humility, an award-winning book.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Hmm.
Congratulations. And we'll have all your links in the show notes. But for anyone on the go, where's the best place that they can find out more about you and your work?
Yeah, I would start with apoyocoaching.com. Apoyo is Apoyo coaching.com. Apoyo stands for support for in Spanish. So the way I talk about the work I do is I listen, bring clarity, provide support. Apoyo coaching and consulting.
Love it. Love it. This has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for
Thank
all your
you.
insights today.
Thank you.
And thank you, everyone, for listening to another episode of the Empathy Edge podcast. If you like what you heard, you know what to do. Please rate, review, and share it with a friend or a colleague. And until next time, please remember that cash flow, creativity, and compassion are not mutually exclusive. Take care and be kind.